Welcome to Coach's Corner Podcast by Well at Humana, where we talk all things health and fitness with an authentic, informative, and real-world lens. Our goal is to help guide you in your journey to live well. Whether it's your first time here or we're on your favorites list, we want to thank you for tuning in to Season 2.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Coach's Corner. This week, we are talking about pre- and postnatal training, or training for two. I'm your host, Dana, and I also have host Amy here with me in the studio.
Hey, guys.
We also have a special guest with us, our general manager from Well at Humana, Stephanie Towers. Welcome, Stephanie.
Hey, y'all.
So just to tell you a little bit about our guest today, because I always like for you to have some kind of knowledge of who's speaking to you. Stephanie has a master's degree in exercise science and an exhaustive list of certificate credentials that we don't have the time to go over those. Specifically relating to our topic today, though, Stephanie is a pre- and postnatal performance training specialist. Where her career started was more on the corporate fitness side back in 2016 as a health fitness specialist. And then she moved more into a program manager side. Her tenure includes a group fitness instructor. She's worked with the Marine Corps as a community service position in Okinawa. Am I saying that correct? Japan?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. As a fitness and high intensity tactical training coordinator. So a plethora of knowledge that's coming to you today, particularly pertaining to pre and postnatal. But we have a special guest, Amy. So this is the best part of the show. We're gonna do some rapid fire.
Oh dear.
I'm gonna turn it over to Amy.
All right. So, Stephanie, how these work? I'm just going to say them real fast. You answer fast with your heart. Just this first thing that comes to you. There should be, there's like maybe one hard one you'll have to think about. All right. We'll start easy. What's your favorite color?
My favorite color is teal.
Everything. Oh,
Everything's teal.
just for some background, everything Stephanie owns is teal.
Everything.
Much, yeah.
Where is the coolest place you've lived?
That would be Okinawa, Japan.
I knew that. You said that in the intro, and I was like, ooh, you took my rapid fire. What's your favorite exercise?
I love every squat that exists.
Nice. What's your favorite snack?
Cookies.
Are you a morning person or a night owl?
Ooh. I would say neither. I'm like a middle of the day type of a person.
All right. What's your favorite movie genre?
That's a good one.
That's a really good question.
That wasn't even the hard one.
Favorite movie genre? I guess it would be like funny.
Comedy.
Yeah,
Love it. That's a
I
comedy.
don't know.
Love it. Do you have any pets?
I have a dog and a cat.
What do you do to relax?
I read.
Okay. What is one thing you'd like to learn more about?
Ooh. So I think as our team knows, I am a forever student. So just more about like the exercise science. Like I'm always delving deeper into a new genre of specialty.
Nice. And then this is the hard one. What would your spy code name be?
Ooh. Spy code name.
This one might be
Like
too
we
hard.
might have to get a pass.
What?
That's hard.
That
What
is
would yours
really
be?
hard.
Stealthy Stephanie.
I
don't know.
We're gonna stay with that.
We're gonna stay
We're gonna
with that.
If you
Stay
come at the
there.
end, we'll come back to that.
Just have that in the
Stealthy
back of your
Stephanie.
head.
I
I
like
like
it.
that. Do you have one, Amy?
I don't know. I haven't
Me-
thought
me
about
neither.
it. I know. That said that was
You
a hard
asked
one.
me, but
Yeah.
you don't have one?
We'll come
about it.
back.
Yeah.
We'll come back here.
We'll end it with that.
So I think where I want to start today is just really coming back to what is pre and postnatal training, and what are some myths that you're aware of that really aren't factual. I think there's a lot of information. There's so much information out there for expecting mothers, and then after delivery, first time mothers, second time, like what is good, what is bad, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. So can you clarify what is pre and postnatal training? And then what are some myths that you're aware of that aren't factual?
Wait, really quick before we get started, I do just want to call out. I just want to call out. We recognize everybody's pregnancy is completely different, very specific to the person. Always important to check with your specific doctor, OBG, all that good stuff. Get your specific clearance. This is typically great information for just a general healthy pregnancy, but just to call out anything specific. Everyone's different. Check with your doctor.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Great call out, Amy.
Yeah.
So pre and postnatal training really refers to the pre part, or perinatal training, which is actively you are pregnant. So you're going through those first, second, third trimester pregnancy. Postnatal is that period of time after you've given birth. And that can last for however long it needs to last. And so some of the myths that are common that people just like think about are like, most women think that they shouldn't exercise when they get pregnant.
Or they're told not to, right?
Or they're told not to by somebody, doctor, a friend, family, something. There's some preconceived notion that you should not exercise, which is completely false. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists actually recommends that for women with uncomplicated pregnancies, they should be encouraged to engage in both aerobic and strength conditioning exercises before, during, and after pregnancy. So that's coming straight from ACOG. Like, you should be exercising, you should be working out.
Where does this get lost, I wonder, though, right? Like, if this is coming from the American College of Gynecology, basically, like, where, I feel like, and this is just a general question, Stephanie may not have the answer to this, but like, where do you all feel like that gets lost on, like, women should not work out during pregnancy?
So I think it comes from protecting the fetus at all costs. And like, most people think that exercise is somewhat dangerous. It could be like a really old preconceived notion of, you know, we shouldn't be doing any strenuous activities so that we have a healthy birth. But it's so old fashioned, right? Like, there's so many advances that have been made in the past 100 years, even in past decades, that there's no reason for it anymore. There's so much literature, so much peer-reviewed literature out there, and research and studies that have been done that have said it is healthy, it is okay to do as long as you don't have any sort of complications during your pregnancy. And then that's when you would check with your doctor, obviously, just to see what they recommend as well.
Is this more like, so, and I've heard people worried like, oh, I've never done anything, I shouldn't do anything while I'm pregnant, or like, oh, I can continue what I'm doing while I'm pregnant. People can still start like walking and that actually does help with pregnancy too.
Absolutely.
Is that fact, myth? I hear a lot.
That's fact. Just because you weren't working out before you were pregnant doesn't mean that you can't do something. Baby steps, no pun intended. But just take those little steps. Start off low and work your way up through that pregnancy. Obviously, like, you're going to feel different things during a pregnancy. So, like, do what feels good to you and do what your doctor tells you is okay for you to do. But start off small. Go for walks. Start off with low intensity type exercises, things that aren't going to be a huge impact or impactful on, like, your joints and, you know, any sort of belly that's growing, things like that.
I think, like, what you said too, and I think we get to this a little bit later about talking around if you need to consult your doctor and they may tell you one thing, like, be curious.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Like advocate for
yourself,
your own health as well as your baby's, on, like, maybe that's an opinion piece for them, maybe that's a scientific thought, but like understanding maybe why that's being said.
Yeah, ask questions, definitely. Like, why am I not able to do this? And just kind of poke at them a little bit. I always recommend it.
What's some other myths that you've heard of?
Ooh, another myth would be eating for two.
That's a
huge
big one.
That'd be the only reason I want to get pregnant. So you
can have those extra calories.
What does that mean, though? Like, I feel like there's a meaning behind that. That, like, what should you do?
So you should just be increasing your caloric intake. I believe it's by like 500 to 600 calories. It shouldn't be definitely doubling your caloric intake, because then you're going to put on too much weight, right? And we don't want that, because that can be like really bad for the baby and its growth and development. So you just want to eat about probably half, like what you're eating plus half. And that would be like, obviously with your doctor, to talking to them about your specific pregnancy, because every pregnancy is different. Every birth is different. So we don't want to sugarcoat anything or like generalize anything too much, but you should only be eating typically what you're normally eating during the day, plus about half of that calories.
So you can eat a little more.
You should
I'm gonna be
eat
a little more, but like with double, I'm thinking about like energy expenditure. Like you're typically not as active,
Nope.
so then you aren't burning that energy.
Exactly.
And some of that energy is going to the baby, but the baby's not big enough either to need all that energy. So it goes somewhere and puts you in a weight gain mentality pretty quickly.
Yeah.
When typically the baby weight would come, specifically first children, more towards the end of
Yep.
the third trimester.
And then we also get into like gestational diabetes too. If we start consuming too many calories, there's always that risk of when you put on too much weight, you can develop gestational diabetes. And for most people, that goes away. For some people, it doesn't. They end up having type 1 or type 2 diabetes eventually. So like, we just kind of want to get rid of that myth and break it a little bit. Like, we're not eating for two. We're eating for you plus a fetus plus a baby.
And I think it's still important to focus on those nutrient-rich foods and proteins and not getting your extra 500 calories with like the pint of ice cream
Oh,
you
absolutely.
might be craving.
And I mean, it's still about balance too, right? You're going to have hormonal fluctuations
have
where
those
you're going to want some of that and the
cravings.
cravings, but it's always also important to like, can we talk about that a little bit? Like we shift gears here a lot. So like, what does it look like from, how does that help the baby? Like the nutrients that you consume, they're consuming too. So like, what does that look like from if you're someone that's worked out before, you're continuing to work out, or you're continuing to eat nutrient dense foods, like what does that actually do to the development of the baby?
Of the baby. So by consuming those nutrient dense foods that are just like what we consider quote unquote healthy, you're going to have just an overall generally healthier baby or at birth. They're going to be able to manage the stresses of labor better upon birth, and then recover quickly too. So like if you think about it, like mom doesn't just have to recover, baby also has to recover from being birthed. So having all of, like, just like anybody else, it's a recovery process. What we put into our bodies helps us to recover. Same with babies. Like, they're going through a lot of developmental changes. So their brain's going to develop better with those nutrient-dense foods. Their cardiovascular system's going to be a little bit more developed or develop more in a quote-unquote healthy way. And then the risk of being overweight or obese is also going to decrease as well. So, like, when we consume those foods, we need to consider, like, it's not just for us in our health. It's for the baby as well.
I think that's a super interesting standpoint of, like, what can happen post-pregnancy and development of the child based on, like, what you do during pregnancy or the type of exercise you do. Typically, cardiovascular should be for cardiovascular health. And in our world, typically people think of cardio as a simple weight loss component. And I think that's totally like flipped on its head to be actually what it is when you're pregnant. It's for heart health. It's for your cardiovascular system. And you're actually developing a stronger cardiovascular system in your child. It's really cool. It's super cool. Like I find it so interesting. Is like you're actually using cardio for what it should be used for and overall cardiovascular health and heart health rather than a typical weight loss component, which it can be used, but that's in supplementation to diet.
So you're strengthening two hearts for the
Exactly.
work of one.
Yes, mamas are
Seems
amazing.
efficient.
And lungs as well. Like, we have to remember that too.
So I know we touched on this, but can we go a little bit further? Because I know this is like a very, very common question. What if you've never worked out before? Is it a good idea to just start once you know you're pregnant? And, like, what are some things they can do if it's not a good idea?
Yeah. So as long as you've been cleared by your doctor and they say everything's okay, absolutely go ahead and start. I would start with low intensity interval training or like medium intensity interval training, depending on how you're feeling. During that first trimester, there's a lot of nausea or morning sickness, which morning sickness can happen anytime during the day. It doesn't have to just be in the morning. And so you might not feel like going to a CrossFit class, right? Like that might be a little bit of a stretch. So start with maybe some yoga, or go for a walk around your block. If you have a dog, take your dog for a walk. Do like the little things to help build you up. And then once you start feeling good and everything's still okay and you're like getting into your second trimester, then start doing maybe a little bit more high intensity interval training. During that second trimester is typically when women start feeling a little bit better. They start feeling more energetic. That morning sickness period goes away. So they're able just to do a little bit more. Their strength can also increase during that period too. So like that's a great time to start doing that high intensity interval training, start doing a little bit more weight training, strength training. And then during the third trimester, if you hadn't exercised before, you're probably going to want to go back down to low intensity. The development of the belly can be uncomfortable to do most movements. And like, it just becomes to be like hard to bend down and tie your shoes even. So like going back to those low intensity exercises, doing some maybe prenatal yoga would be just a great way to keep going.
I think it's also a great time to like consult with a professional during this time. If you're a person that, whether you've never done any training before or whether you're new to training and you still like, this is a big part for you where you want to stay healthy during your pregnancy, you want to stay active, I think this is a great time to work with a professional. Yeah. To just ensure that you're doing things safely when maybe you're not an expert is a great time to work with someone individually one-on-one. And then you could take those things and continuing them after, but it gives you just a little bit more of a boost of confidence that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely hire a personal trainer or coach and find a yoga instructor who's certified in pre and postnatal because that's really going to help.
What do you feel like, I know you mentioned a little bit on like what they can expect in different trimesters, when to take out certain movements. Like overall, I want to talk about this because it's not talked about enough for all the ladies out there, but like what should every woman do to just prepare for pregnancy from an exercise standpoint? There's, you know, we always hear about pelvic floor exercises, things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about why those are important? What happens to women after birth that they can do some things to fix that? So what would you say like every woman should do to prepare for pregnancy in terms of like different exercises that will help them during childbirth?
Yeah. So if we look at the pregnancy aspect of it, for most women, this is going to be the most labor intense or physical challenge of their life, right? Like giving birth is like a marathon. Because you're in labor.
I've never ran a marathon.
Some women are in labor for like hours and hours and hours. And some people, they go to the hospital and they have a baby. Like that's great for them. But for most women, it's like 12 plus hours of labor. So like if we think of it mentally, physically, and emotionally, it is the greatest athletic event that they're ever going to come across in their life.
Basically, you women are beasts.
Yeah, right?
Like,
so
kudos.
like, you know, like if we're training for a marathon or a powerlifting competition, we're going to want to prep for that. Same thing for pregnancy. Like you want to be as prepared as possible for your pregnancy, for your birth, and for being a new parent. Yeah. Like I feel like just being a new parent, chasing after little kids, carrying around those car carriers is just a feat of its own. So some of the things that happen during pregnancy is like you're carrying a child, so you have this fetus sitting on your pelvic floor, which can stretch your pelvic floor. To get a little bit into what the pelvic floor is, it's about 14 muscles that make up the bottom of your pelvis where all of your pelvic organs sit. So we want to make sure that's strong. So do a bunch of pelvic floor activation exercises to strengthen that up. That's going to help just with the whole pregnancy and the birthing process and recovery.
And like with recovery, I mean, you hear so many women that have an experience where they've given birth multiple times or just once and they can't jump rope anymore without peeing.
Can you
like
do...
let's just be real here. Like that I feel like that is an emotion, like it's aggravating.
Yep.
It's
embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. It's emotionally
Annoying.
like just annoying. And
Like
it's
I don't
something
even
that-
want to do that
Yeah.
because it makes me pee myself.
Like what are some things that they could do? I know there's certain things, like can you be pretty specific on like how do you even do these exercises? 'Cause I
Can
don't
they
really
be
know.
done while you're pregnant? Or
Yes.
is this like you would do before and after? You can do it
You
during...
can do it while you're pregnant,
okay.
before, after, anytime.
Huh.
You can do it
You do it
middle
right
of the
now.
day while you're sleeping.
Okay, so how do you do these things?
So there's pelvic floor activation fast and pelvic floor activation slow.
Okay.
So fast is going to be, well, let's just talk about how to do the pelvic floor activation
Okay.
first. So if you imagine yourself going to the bathroom,
Okay.
and you like cut your pee stream off like midstream, and you hold it, and then you let it go again and relax, and then you cut it off and hold it. That's how you would do a pelvic floor activation exercise.
I just did this. I'm like thinking. I feel like
weird.
it's like it's
They're literally over here. Just,
I am like
Yeah.
my
faces
mind
doing it.
and my eyes are going, and I'm like trying to stop
The
this.
cameras, like, we're
you
just all
can
staring.
you can legitimately feel it.
Yes.
Like,
I don't like that.
She's
you
like,
can-
no thanks.
So like, how would you do these exercises? Like, is it
So-
like 3 sets of 10, or like, what do you do for that?
Yeah, so I like to do them or tell people that I'm working with to do them to the beat of a song. So you find a slow song, you can find a faster song that has a faster tempo to it, and just do the pelvic floor activation exercise to the tempo of that song. Or you can just do like hold for 3 seconds, release for 5 seconds, hold for a longer period of time or a shorter period of time. But you really want to do both of those because that's really going to help with control. It's going to help to strengthen those muscles so that when you do give birth, they're going to repair faster. And then you're not going to experience that incontinence, hopefully. That's
Will
the goal.
some like be there forever? Like if your pelvic floor like never comes back the way it should?
Sometimes it happens.
Okay.
I always recommend to my clients that I'm working with who are pre and postnatal that they like push their doctors to refer them to a pelvic health therapist, which is just going to PT for your pelvic floor.
So, like, is there any movements? We talked about like pelvic floor exercises pre and post. Are there any movements that you feel like this should be done or this absolutely shouldn't be done?
As far as pelvic floor or just like
Just in
movements
general, just in general movements. Is there any that like just really you should avoid?
There are some that you should avoid, but that's going to be dependent on the person too. Like, you're obviously not going to want to lay flat on your belly.
Yeah.
That's going to be super uncomfortable and unsafe for the baby. Being in a quadruped position even sometimes can be unsafe for the baby too. I've worked with women who are perfectly fine being in quadruped though, so like that's dependent on the mom. If she says she's fine with it, she's fine with it.
Okay.
There are going to be some that are just like you wouldn't want to do definitely into that late second, third trimester. So like you wouldn't want to do a clean. I'm just
gonna
going to throw
give
that out
away.
there. Yeah.
Like you're literally pulling it right by your
Literally
belly.
pulling it by your belly. So it's kind of just taking like that common knowledge of like what is going to be safe. I wouldn't lift like super heavy weights even. Like I wouldn't be going for a max set
Okay.
or anything like that. But weightlifting is still recommended. I wouldn't be maxing out on my weights and sets.
Would you say weightlifting or strength training is the preferred method of training during pregnancy, or is it cardio based? What is it? Is there any that's better than the other?
I would stick with the low, medium, or high intensity interval training because that's really going to set you up. If we think about labor, there are long bouts of like when you're in active labor and then when you're resting, right? So if we're doing those intervals, we can do like 30 seconds of work, 60 seconds of rest, and then we can slowly progress up to 60 seconds of work, 45 seconds of rest, or so on, to help mimic that labor period because you're going to be in labor, active labor, pushing, sweating, screaming, high exertion, and then you're going to be like resting before that next bout of labor comes on. So it's really like mimicking that labor experience when you're getting ready to give birth.
You're literally like prepping for the
Yes,
competition.
you're literally
Yeah.
prepping for labor.
So we talked about like the pelvic floor. Can you talk a little bit about how I know both of you have either heard of women, you've seen this happen when the core muscles like completely separate. Is that different than the pelvic floor? What is that? Can you talk to our audience a little bit about what that is and typically what you see occur after that happening?
Yeah. So that separation in the abdominal wall, it's called diastasis recti, and it's the linea alba, which is that connective tissue that separates your left and right abdominal muscles. It just stretches from having a baby, like growing a baby inside of you. There's only one way the baby can go, and that's typically out, and that's why you see the big rounded belly. And after birth, typically for most women, that will on its own come back together slowly. Depending on the person, it can take months or it can take up to about 2 years to completely reform, remodel itself. For a very few women, this doesn't remodel itself. They have to actually have it surgically repaired, which it's not too many women, thank goodness.
Okay.
But during that period, like if you have been diagnosed with diastasis recti, there are exercises, like you should not be doing any abdominal exercises, any specific abdominal exercises.
Because they're pretty much like just separated from what's holding them together.
Yep. So no crunches, no planks even, nothing that is abdominal specific.
Typically, this has to repair itself.
It has to repair itself before you can get cleared to go back and do all of that. There are different levels of diastasis recti too, and so like typically it's diagnosed by your finger width. If you hold one finger in between that abdominal wall, like you're good to go. If it's 2 fingers or more wide, then that's when we get into like the diastasis recti diagnosis.
Is that something that you can be like predisposed to, or like if you have better core muscles, are you better off, or is it something that just happens?
It's kind of something that just happens. So during pregnancy, there's this large amount of relaxin. It's a hormone in our body that is released. So it makes all of our ligaments, our joints, like everything just more stretchy. So even that connective tissue in our body becomes more stretchy because we're literally changing our bodies to
have a baby.
So we need to be a little bit more stretchy, a little bit more bendy during that time. And it's just that ligament, that connective tissue that is stretching from the release of relaxin. Too far. And it just stretches too far sometimes.
And also, like, if you are more of a small female and your baby is a little bit larger or tall or long, could that be more likely to happen because the baby needs space?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. I think let's transition a little bit to postnatal.
Okay.
Because we talked a lot of prenatal. Postnatal, you've just went through the hardest physical events of your life.
It's
but
literal
probably,
bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Literally
you're
that.
building a
Literally
body.
body.
However, the most rewarding event that you've ever went through, and you're just amazing for doing it. So all you mamas out there, like,
Kudos.
you guys are awesome. But postnatal, there's a lot of questions around this.
I'm sure.
It's like, when can you come back to fitness? And I think this is, one of those, it depends, but like typically, what are you usually seeing? And what do women need to be cognizant of?
Yeah, so typically for a vaginal birth, a natural birth, it's going to be about that 6-week mark where your doctor would probably clear you as long as there aren't any ongoing complications from your birth. And that's going to be dependent, like if you stop bleeding, like if there's still excessive bleeding afterwards and stuff like that, it might be longer, but typically about 6
bleeding.
weeks. Yeah, it's a pretty long period of time. If it's a C-section, because C-section is a surgery, so you're cutting through that abdominal wall, it's going to take a lot longer to heal. So that's really dependent. It could be 8+ weeks. It just depends on when everything stitches itself back together, like when you completely heal. And you have to think about it is a C-section is a major abdominal surgery.
You're literally cutting through your abdominal wall.
Yes.
And it's like, it's seriously talked about like it's just normal.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I just
Or like
had a-
that's the easy way out.
Yeah, that's
like,
the easy way.
what?
Like, no.
They're both hard.
They're both terrible.
And
or not terrible, sorry, ladies. But
they're both
hard.
magical
They're both
in
hard.
their ways.
Yes, but
so
like,
a fact here is only about 10% of C-sections are actually medically necessary, and I believe the statistic is around like 23 or 25% of births are C-sections, but only 10% of those are medically necessary. So like people are electing for C-sections, and it's like, ooh, that recovery period though, like, man.
and it's one of those things that, you know, typically you mentioned 6 weeks, depending on if you are still bleeding, like, or 8 weeks for a C-section. It could be longer than that.
Yeah.
You could not.
It could
You
be-
could feel terrible.
Yeah.
You could have different struggles, and I think it's so. We're just like, oh,
And you
6
have a
weeks or 8
child to
weeks.
take care of.
Exactly.
Like, oh, just 6 weeks or
Yeah.
8 weeks, and like, that's so quick when you think about what you just
Yeah.
went through for an entire year. Let's be honest, like an entire at least 10 months of like developing a child within the womb, then going through the birthing event itself. And I think like as women, we're so hard on ourselves to
Bounce
just
back.
bounce
We are.
right back. And it's
and
like,
you don't just recover from that. Like
Yeah.
you're
Like you-
exhausted, you're not
Yeah.
sleeping. That also plays into effect
Of
has
your
a
recovery.
effect on your recovery as well. So I mean, it's just
Also, like, I do want to
amazing.
talk about like the mindset, the hormonal piece that you may be experiencing as well.
yeah.
You talked a little bit about this, and I don't know if it's in here, but I do want to talk about this. I thought it was really interesting when you talked about what happens with a female's hormones, like preparing for pregnancy. And then typically they don't stay in that state, but they never return to like a pre-baby state.
Exactly.
From a nurturing standpoint, from all of that. And you've heard women say like, or we've seen women
Yeah.
be like, I don't know who I am. Like, I'm trying to find myself. And they're typically never the same again. But what they really don't realize is they're not the same.
They're not. They're
chemically.
literally not the same anymore after you give birth.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's-
Because I find it super interesting because I think
Yeah.
all women are their biggest critics. And like, I want you ladies to give yourself some grace.
Exactly. And it's amazing too. Like when you get pregnant, you have so many changes happening in your body, not just physiological changes with like developing a baby and the relax and releasing and, you know, you're all loosey-goosey, but you have more changes happening like in a chemical way too, like in your brain. Your brain is changing because now you're going from like not being a mom to being a mom. So like that nurture side of you kind of has to kick in a little bit.
It has to like come out.
Yeah,
of it
it has
because
to
it's
come out.
dormant
Yeah.
in the brain, basically,
Yeah.
right? Until
Exactly.
this hormone is released.
Exactly. So during that pregnancy, like your body's just releasing all these hormones and like they have an effect on your brain. They have an effect on your body. And like Dana said, a lot of the times a woman will give birth and she's just like, I'm not the same as I was before, or heaven forbid, like their partner even tells them like, you're not the same person as you were before you had our baby. And
Don't say that to your partner.
Don't say that to your partner. But it's true because now they have a baby that they're taking care of, that they have to nurture, that they're responsible for. And so like that motherhood, all those chemical changes happen so that they can be a mom. And it's just, it's amazing, right? Like,
But I
it's
feel
just-
like it could also cause some internal struggle and some
can.
like that postpartum depression piece.
because like
and-
Dana said, like now they're like, I don't know who I am. Like, I don't know who I am as a mom or a person. Like all my friends, like their support group falls apart sometimes too. Like there's single friends who don't have kids. Sometimes they don't see them as much because now they have a baby. They're doing all these things for their baby and their family. It's just that societal pressure of like, I'm here for my child and I have to be here for my child, but I can't be here for myself. And you have to remember to take care of yourself too. Like You can't go on just living for somebody else. You have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of other people.
It's like your cup has to be full too.
Exactly.
And that's really difficult, I know, post-baby. But can we talk about, like, I want to get into the postpartum stuff. But can we talk about maybe how we can prep our mindset for, like, the postnatal phase? Because I feel like once you get to the postnatal phase, it almost just happens to you.
Yeah.
And it's never like, because when you're pregnant, I would assume, I don't have children, so let's just start there. But I would assume that you're so excited for the baby to come and you're a little anxious and worried and want it just to be healthy overall. So the pregnancy part takes over everything. And oftentimes, the postnatal phase is really reactionary instead of like any thought beforehand of like any proactive sense. So can you talk a little bit about mindset and prepping yourself for a postnatal phase?
Yeah, so the biggest thing to remember is your life's going to change. And I think a lot of people have the notion that they can continue to live like how they were before they had a baby, but that's impossible, right? There's another human being in your household. So your life is going to change. And so before you give birth, like, let's try to find ways that are going to help you instead of hinder you. So if that's like meal prepping for a little while beforehand and putting some meals in the freezer to help you, like, with that mental load of like, oh, I have to make dinner now. Like, you can just pull some out of the freezer, right? Or finding a support group or a group of friends, like, while you're pregnant, that have kids already, so that you already have like a mom group that you can go to with questions.
I think that's huge, right? And I think people overlook that a lot of times. Like, everyone needs support, either support groups, support friends, and in whatever phase you are in life. Like, think about who you hang out with, right?
Yeah.
They're usually in the same, I don't want to say phase, but like literally in the same realm of life that you are in. Like, I have friends that are all moms and dads, and then I have friends that they don't have children. And it's very different. Like, and I have a lot of good friends that are from undergrad, and most of you know I played a sport in college, so those people are like, it's like a sorority, right? Yeah. There's really tight-knit. And once we've realized, we get together about once a quarter. We try to. There's a group of us, and there's some things that like we're really vulnerable and talk about, because I don't have children. Some of my other friends don't have children. Some of them do. And it's talking about, we're in the same phase of life, but we're experiencing two different lives. And I think it's important to recognize that with your friends, and it can be made in a really sensitive way. But I think it's also to have friends that are in the same phase of life or living what you live, because it's important to be able to vent or understand or have a group of people that can help you work through that have experienced the same thing. So it's not people with kids or excluding people without kids. Like, don't be that person. Also, on the contrary, don't be the kid without kids that can't stand if your friends bring your kids. It's a fine medium there. But I think it's really important to find a group that can directly relate to what you are experiencing firsthand.
Absolutely.
Like, whether that's like friends you hang out with or your mom friends. Find a group.
Find a group of friends. Find a support group. And then don't expect, I think I said it a little bit before, but don't put that pressure on yourself that like things are going to be a certain way once you become a mom, that things are going to be smooth sailing, because literally you're going to be covered in vomit most of the time, right? Like, you're changing diapers. True. Like, that's not perfect. There's so many ups and downs of being a parent that I think even those of us who don't have kids, like, we kind of overlook, like, oh, like, their life is so easy. They have like a toddler and they just make it seem so easy. They're running them around everywhere, but it's not easy. Like, you've got to dress them, you've got to feed them, you have to do everything for this tiny human.
Them.
You can't just get in the car and run to the grocery store.
Exactly.
No, it's a whole thing.
Pack that thing up. Put the car seat in.
You got to get them down the stairs, put on their coats. Like, it's a whole process.
And I think that's where some women may start to feel bad when they're having different emotional feelings. which leads us into like, I want to talk about postpartum depression.
Absolutely.
You talked to us about baby blues. I want to talk more about those. And it's a topic that not until recently was commonly talked about. It was not talked about very often. It was almost something that should be hush-hush.
Yep.
And you experience it, you experience alone, maybe with your doctor, maybe with not. Can you talk about what happens with postpartum depression?
Yeah, so postpartum depression happens in more women. It occurs in more women than we actually realize. I don't have the exact statistic on me, but it's a majority of women experience some sort of postpartum depression. And that comes from the hormonal changes that happen after giving birth. It's kind of like you're on that high during labor and holding your baby afterwards, and then you hit just like a low, a real low. And mostly it's because they dwell, I don't want to say mostly because they dwell, but they start thinking of like, oh, I have a baby now and I'm never going to be the same again. It's true.
You're probably running on
That's
less sleep
absolutely
too.
true. You're on less sleep. Like there's so much stuff that is happening. You're
And
exhausted.
so many things with chemical changes in the brain.
Yep.
That's like, some of it's like,
It
it's
is.
not your fault.
It's not your fault.
Yeah.
This is where you would definitely want to seek help, is if you're feeling those just like low depressive episodes, especially when it's ongoing. If there's something called baby blues, and that is temporary. It's just that low after giving birth where you realize like, oh, I've done this. I have a baby now. I love my baby and I have to take care of my baby, but like I have a baby now. But that's temporary. It goes like most women, they just bounce right out of that. But if it's prolonged, like any sort of other depressive episode, definitely seek help. It is treatable, which
That's
is a
good
good
to know.
thing, just like any other form of depression. So that's when you're going to want to talk to your provider, talk to a therapist. It's just...
One of those.
Man,
one
I
of
bet
those
social
things.
media doesn't help either, because you see all these
No.
like happy families on the beach in their little white t-shirts, and you're sitting there and your kid's throwing up all over you.
Yeah.
Maybe another one's crying. You haven't slept. It's hard because you don't see any. No one shows that part.
No,
I mean, I've never really even seen that part. Like I wouldn't even know how.
They show
hard it
the
is.
mom in the bikini on the beach,
Uh-huh.
who's, rail thin again,
Yeah.
who's quote
And
unquote back to her.
And super
The happy
quick.
families all
Yeah.
done up.
You just
Yeah.
don't know. It's like, it's
Yeah.
anything with
That's
social
all.
media that people are like revealing more and more is like, it's a comparison game, and
It
just
is.
don't do it.
Don't compare yourself to somebody else. Especially don't compare your birth and your recovery after birth to somebody else. Like you're a different person. You're a completely different body. But it's that chemical and hormonal change in the brain that postpartum depression develops from.
So as we come full circle here, as we come back, like, and we close this episode out, when have you seen clients get fully back to normal? If training prior, things like, how long does that take? I think,
quote unquote normal.
yeah,
Quote unquote.
to their normal, right? What is, how long does that typically take? I think that's a good way to close this out, is like, there's some unrealistic expectations that we set on ourselves.
Yeah.
So like, what are some things that you see? How long does that typically take?
So for clients that I've had who were physically active prior, and I mean like for a long time prior, it was typically about a year after they gave birth and after they were cleared from their doctor. So like a little bit longer than a year.
So
And that's
pregnancy-
to like normal activity,
That's
like
to, like-
pre-pregnancy activities.
Yeah, that's like the pre-pregnancy strength activity, all that kind of stuff. We're
So
not going to,
typically a year of pregnancy,
yeah,
if you count like the 6 weeks of
of
post,
recovery, yeah.
and then pretty much expect like about a year
About a year,
recovery
yeah.
to get back to your quote unquote normal state of where you were in training prior to having a baby.
And
Yeah.
That's usually when a lot of people want to have that second one too.
I
And get over
know.
the, oh, you're back in it.
You're back at it again. But for clients that I've had who weren't really physically active beforehand, it took a little bit longer for them to like kind of get back into things because they were a little less. It dealt with motivation. It was they had a baby and it's like, oh, I got fit for my baby and now I don't need to do that anymore, which to each their own. But it was a little bit longer than a year.
What are some considerations to take in consideration when you're looking to come back, and how long that can take?
That's a really good question. If you are going to breastfeed is a huge consideration, because breastfeeding, the longer you breastfeed for, like technically the more weight you're able to lose, because you're expending those calories in a different way. Yeah. So that could like decrease that time period to come back to normal. You do have to eat more calories during that time period too. If you don't breastfeed, you are going to put on some weight. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it goes for a lot of women. But it can hinder training just because, if you are breastfeeding, it can hinder training because they are more tender. Your breasts are more tender during that time. So there are a lot of things that you're just not going to be able to do.
Yeah. Can we just touch just really quick on like even past post-pregnancy, you're raising your kids, the benefits of just having that healthy lifestyle and being able to model that for your child, like just how important that is to take care of yourself. And so your child sees you taking care of themselves, and it just starts instilling those healthy habits even as a child.
Yeah. Kids watch us.
They
right?
see everything.
They see every little thing we do. So if you are one of those parents who are more active and you're at the gym and you kind of live that lifestyle, they're going to see it and they're going to mimic it. They're little monkey sees, monkey does. If you're a parent who likes to just sit on their phone all the time, guess what? They're going to be, hey, can I play a game on your phone? They're going to be a little iPad kid.
Yeah.
So what we do really does have an impact in what children around us
It's just what they're exposed to, right? It's like, I have a good friend of mine that I think she's done, she was an active individual prior. She trained throughout her pregnancy, and she's been really involved in her post-pregnancy life. And her son is like, he's 5, and she works out at home. So she typically has like a dumbbell set at home, a kettlebell set. It's relatively small. Like she has a little setup going on, and it's so cute. She'll post on Instagram, and he's like training with her now, and he's like 5.
Little foam dumbbells.
Yeah, he has little 3-pound dumbbells, and he has little 1 pounds. And she tells me all the time, he'll wake up like when she'll wake up, and he's like, "Are we gonna train today?" Like he totally gets them in just a lifestyle habit really early on, without really any preaching to them. It's simply them seeing that that's something you're devoted to.
Yeah. And let's face it, if a little kid is asking you, "Are we going to train today?" The answer is yes. Like,
no, Bobby.
Like, how do you say no to that?
This is couch day.
Yeah, like we're a day off here.
I've seen those little like foam workout
they're
things on
so
Amazon,
cute.
like little barbells, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so darn cute.
They're so cute, and children have great movement patterns.
Oh yeah.
So let them move freely. They move better than us because they haven't created those bad habits yet.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, so much for being on our show today.
It's a pleasure.
We will be back next week. I hope you ladies learned a ton about pre- and postnatal training. And please, if you have any questions about pre- and postnatal training, email us at well@humana.com. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks.